All right. Day 224, Gaza War, no end in sight. I've got Jon Elmer here. Hey, John.
Hey Justin, thanks for having me.
John, we have been at the fire hose of data on all these attacks, so we're going to have to try to figure out how to present them. You did a noble job on Wednesday. They gave you an hour. Ali mentioned that they gave you an hour so that they didn't have to give you 4 hours.
And then
So,
some people wanted 4 hours. So I
um,
think the resistance is really having a moment in amid the horrors that everybody's watching. I think there's no question that there is an inspiration from the fighters. I guess we'll talk more about that because Abu
absolutely.
Obeida mentioned it. I mean, Nasrallah
Absolutely.
mentioned it the other day too, and I just think there's no question that with what we're seeing, these videos from the last 7 days are incredible.
Incredible. Quantity, quality,
Quantity, quality, number of targets, like speed, what's the like quickness to
turnover.
publish? Yeah,
Yeah.
turnover.
Yeah.
Quick turnover, obvious units functioning in coordination, not guerrilla stuff. Like you're still seeing the army fighting. Jabalia is just to think that the amount of pain that was delivered on Jabalia with the assumption that Israel had maintained some sort of operational control and then starves them for 5 months. They've like virtually starved them to death in Jabalia. No hospital, no functioning anything. And then they move in a lightning invasion that nobody saw coming, and they're met instantly by what looked like thousands of fighters ready to go. We saw them choosing appropriate weapons. Yeah, like Jabalia was where they were putting those 2,000-pound bombs into entire apartment blocks. They were killing 200 people in airstrikes. Just really brutal early days of the war. And then just to have them come to Israel, lightning raid back, and then boom, and we're seeing videos from tunnels, we're seeing videos from elevated shooting positions, fighting all through Jabalia, the Jabalia refugee camp, Zaytun, all through that belt, all fighting along there in quality and quantity that we have not seen before in the war in month 8.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And it was interesting because I think it was a bit of a stratagem by the Israelis to say, we're invading Rafah, we're invading Rafah, we're invading Rafah. And then they sent one group to Rafah and another group way to the north. And
Two even. I think there was three divisions and they split two of the divisions off, sent one to Zaytun. And Zaytun in Gaza City, that's the third time they've invaded Zaytun because they invaded again. Remember, we talked about it back in February. We talked about whether we were going to give it the Battle of Zaytun status, right? Because it was
mhm.
like that much of a fight in that 2 week window. And then they have to go right back into Zaytun 2 months later, and the resistance meets them immediately.
And they
It,
go right back out again,
and they
right?
pull out again. Failed with no mission accomplished in that. They're not in any tunnels, and they weren't in February. I remember on this show commenting about that because that was the February operation where Saraya al-Quds reused the F-16 bomb really dramatically on that Israeli force. And basically the next day, they were gone from Zaytun. And they had said at the time that that it was a precise raid, that they were going for tunnel apparatus for part of the tunnel network that they believed connected the north and the south, which is a very, if true, very strategic, important objective that they didn't reach.
I mean, you were talking about how Qassam or the Palestinian resistance isn't doing guerrilla stuff. If anything, it's Israel that's doing guerrilla stuff. They're doing hit and run operations. They don't want to stay in one place and get picked apart. So they're the ones doing the hit and run actions.
Yeah. And then they rolled into Rafah, and Rafah's defenses are prepared for 7 months.
Yeah.
and Israel rolls into Rafah. They're not even in their tanks inside Rafah. Well, first of all, they were hit outside Rafah, right? That's one of the
Hmm.
reasons they probably uh, expedited the invasion is because they got hit with that mass casualty.
They
It's
had to
clear,
either run away then or go in. Yeah, I
yeah, you had to
suppose.
either back up or go forward because it was obvious that Qassam's rocketry had the
Had their number.
coordinates.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And then they went in and
Ah.
they met those first lines of defense where Qassam was dug in,
Mhm.
where their tunnels, like Israel just fell into multiple ambushes. But they were doing that in Jabalia too. Jabalia's ruined, completely destroyed place. And Qassam is setting up complex ambushes using tunnels in
Yeah.
Jabalia in the eighth month of the war. So
So
just really impressive.
let's
It's
do a let's do a go around and then come
yeah,
back to Gaza because in Ansar Allah in Yemen has hit a couple of ships, but they've also downed another one of those highly expensive MQ-9 Reapers.
number four.
Number four. That's if you count in dollars, we're in
200, what is it, 200 million? I mean, the range, depending on when you get the range is 30 to 50 million dollars a hit for those.
the Iraqis have hit a lot. They've been hitting a lot in a number of other places, even
Yeah.
Haifa, I heard.
And they've been making the Israelis scramble warplanes to shoot
Yeah.
them down because the Israelis can't trust their Iron Dome systems to pick these off. So they're actually scrambling jets. Earlier in the war, they weren't doing that. They were firing air defenses at them. But since the Iranian attack, they've been scrambling jets and shooting them down basically every night.
Um,
So that's a resource trade-off for sure.
I don't think I mentioned, I'm not sure that I mentioned yesterday night that the Hezbollah Air Force has they sent a drone, not a suicide drone, but a drone that did an airstrike on a military position and then flew away. I don't know if you
I
probably
didn't
saw that.
even see that.
There's video of that, John. So
I've been so buried in Gaza.
you see that it's basically the first, they're saying it's the first airstrike from Lebanon
Would
on an
be.
Israeli position ever, and the first airstrike from an Arab country against Israel since 1973. So
Wow.
it's it's a drone, but it has two missiles on it, and it flew over and it launched those missiles, and there's video of that as well. So ground attack. So that's a new. So while they're taking down Israeli and American drones, they're now doing airstrikes of their own. Um,
And it's just the beginning. It's just the tip of the iceberg. I don't know what Israel's plan is here.
well, one thing Israel plans, I guess we can say in the West Bank, they did an airstrike on Jenin,
Yeah, I saw that fighter jet,
a fighter jet doing an
not a drone
airstrike
strike.
on Jenin. So there's Tubas and Tulkarm and Kalkilia, all of the active fighting. I watched an episode of the Resistance podcast. They were talking about ambushes, but yeah, but Israel is doing out and out airstrikes in Jenin now. So that's one of the things the Israelis are planning. Then we have did you see the critique of the floating water dock? Otherwise known as the pier. The government media office called it a floating water dock, and they had a whole critique of it.
The Gaza government?
Yeah, yeah. They were basically like, this floating water dock does not help anybody, and
Yeah,
uh,
and it unloads such a small amount. It's crazy.
and
It's
the
like when it's
Israelis are the ones.
fully
Yeah.
up and loaded, it's going to be 120 truckloads, which is like what Israel could get in less than 3 hours at one border crossing.
The floating water dock does not meet the food needs of our Palestinian people amidst the policy of starving 2.4 million people in the Gaza Strip, including 2 million displaced persons who live on daily aid and require more than 7 million meals daily. What it will provide, what it will provide will not break the famine or cover this immense need for our people in the Gaza Strip. Instead, it will give the occupation a chance to prolong this war that has consumed everything. So that's where they're at. The float, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, both the crossings are closed. I guess you probably reported on that. Rafa's closed. I guess
Yeah,
Tarek probably talked about that
he did,
yesterday.
yeah. Yeah, he did.
And Erez is destroyed, right? It's not just closed. Erez has to be completely rebuilt, and that's the crossing in the north into Israel for
And now you have Israeli mobs burning trucks that aren't even aid trucks. They just
yeah.
burn them because they think they might be aid trucks. So
Yeah, and that causes a problem for aid groups because they have to be insured and protect their drivers. They have to have certain guarantees to even to operate. And so just that like acting like that vandalism and the threat of terrorism is something that uh, obstructs the or complicates the delivery of aid because of the insurance and all.
yeah.
That's
I did want
that's
to. Oh, go ahead.
It's a well, it's just a gruesome that history
Gruesome.
is gonna. It's just the way that the footage of them gleefully, the settlers throwing stuff off the trucks,
Yeah,
and the amount of time and effort they put in the other day to put rocks all over the road so that the trucks couldn't pass at all. Um, and they're just doing it day after day under the noses, not even under the noses, facilitated by the Israeli army because they're in a closed military zone.
yeah.
It's just
It's the army. It is just a different costume. I think Tarek said more or less that yesterday. Um, and uh, yeah, that was. I got a little distracted by that, by thinking of those trucks. Um, Actually, yeah. While we talk about the crossings, I wanted to say to tell you about Ismail Hania's speech yesterday because one of the things that he said that interested me was he said any deal that we make in the future must have return, reconstruction, full ceasefire, permanent, and he said a lifting of the embargo.
no, yeah.
So
Reconstruction, no siege.
yeah,
That's Kassam's position too.
yeah. So that, but that's new. To me, I don't remember that being in the deals
It
until
what
now.
Abu Obeida said it. Abu Obeida said it.
Today?
No, in his previous address,
Okay.
which was sort of on the eve of the negotiations, and he made that clear, the no siege part, and that's
Because
absolutely critical.
because what Hamas had agreed to and the thing they agreed to when they screwed up the Israeli and American plans before the invasion of Rafah was it seemed to imply that the siege was going to continue because it was about quantitative easing.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So since that failed, I guess the notion is it's gonna be what it is now. Um,
The Rafa crossing is such a mess. I don't want to retrace steps you guys have already covered, but
yeah,
um, it's not going to be an easy fix. The Egyptians are not going to be played like this, and the only people that are going to lose are the Gazans, that Gazawis, that every single day the number of people that desperately need to leave
yeah,
for medical care that can't. It's just horrifying for no purpose. Like no, there's no military purpose or
yeah.
yeah,
We're pretty far beyond
we're pretty
military
far
purpose.
beyond that.
Um, so we can, I think we can get back to Gaza. I just wanted to, I know you're kind of up on who the Israelis are that are in each place. I don't like you said, I don't know how important that is, but like there's Givati and Golani that we keep hearing about, and then there's Airborne. So like who's in Rafah and who's in Jabalia right now? And are they the same units that have been there before is part of my
They
question.
switch, so it's the 167th. I mean, they put how they put together their divisions. Like there could be Gavadi and Golani in the same divisions. They could be
Mhm.
paratrooper brigades inside the divisions. But the divisions, the division 162 that's in Rafah right now is the one that fought in Jabalia in December and November, and the 98th division that is fighting in Jabalia is the one who fought for 4 months in Khan Yunis and couldn't win in Khan Yunis.
And then
Um,
who's on the border with Lebanon?
uh, that's the 91st divisions on the border with Lebanon. They're called the Galilee.
And
People call them the Galilee Division or the
and
Galilee Formation.
were they in Gaza?
No, I don't think they were, but they got Golani. They got a Golani battalion, I think the 51st Battalion that was in Gaza. So they populate the divisions with um,
Mhm.
brigades and battalions from they piece them together. So it's not always uh, perfectly instructive of who it is that's
Mhm.
fighting. But yeah, you're gonna see, and I think we are seeing the paratrooper brigade is moving into Jabalia because they need reinforcements in this fight. And so their paratroopers brigade is basically like shorthand for their special forces brigade. It's just like well-trained infantry. That's who they put into Khan Yunis after the 98th Division couldn't get a result in Khan Yunis because Khan Yunis was planned to be a 3 month war and their rotations are 3 months. And so the fighting force was supposed to complete its mission and then rotate out. And when they didn't complete their mission, the division commander had to say, "We didn't complete our mission. Um, someone else is going to have to come and fight here." And that's when the paratrooper brigade went in and um, so yeah, the Israeli war plans are in tatters. Even from their like who they want to deploy to a place is in tatters because they can't because they're exhausted.
Yeah.
They're yeah,
I mean, I was when you think about it mathematically and you say, okay, 180,000 regulars and 300,000 conscripts, and they're losing in these up tempo, hot days, they're losing a couple of dozen men a day. So
easily.
in theory, they could keep this up for a very long time. But in practice, I think I've said this many, many times to you and on this channel, like it's not going to look like anything is going to happen and then it's all going to fall apart. Like it's
Mm.
just it's not a linear process where you're kind of cutting down, I don't know, cutting a cake one slice at a time. It's more like Jenga where you're taking pieces out of the bottom and the whole tower falls, right?
Yeah, well, we were talking about there's 300 armored vehicles mustered outside of Rafah, right? When we saw
Right.
that satellite footage, I presented it on the show a week ago.
Yeah.
Abu Obeida said today that they've hit 100. They fired on 100 armored vehicles just since the last week, 10 days of those operations. And so we saw 300 vehicles. If you hit 100 of those vehicles, even if only half of those vehicles were hit, you know what I mean? Like the
Yeah,
numbers are
the
just not good.
percentages. Yeah, and the ones they're hitting in the sniper operations are also preferential. They're going after commanders and leaders. The the um
Yeah.
the the armored you made a point in the live stream that I wanted to reiterate because actually a listener sent me some data from that they're working with some Israeli historian or something who was saying that hitting these Yasin 105s and these rocket propelled grenades don't do very much to a tank. And the point is, you were saying that it's not going to blow the tank up like in a movie, but what it does is it penetrates the armor and there's shrapnel inside the tank now. Uh,
Yeah,
So,
the rocket turns into a molten dart essentially, and then
yeah.
that dart, because it's the dual explosion, the dart first dart softens, and then the
Mhm.
second dart penetrates, and the hole only has to be tiny for
Mhm.
that molten piece of metal to enter the tank, and then it cools, right? So it makes it through the wall hot, and then it cools, basically just becomes a bullet, and
Yeah.
then the bullet has lost its intensity, and so it actually just ricochets around
Oh.
inside the thing. They called it the bathtub.
Mhm.
And Americans and Canadian troops talked about it all the time when they got hit by the roadside bombs, because the terrifying part for them on the inside is the way that the shrapnel's just ricocheting all over the metal walls and making these brutal noises. And there's no question. Was there saying that there's not damage? We're not
Yeah.
sure how much damage there is, but
Hmm.
we clearly know that there's fatalities constantly in the armored corps,
Hmm.
including as soon as they rolled into Rafah. There was 6 casualties in their armored corps. Did you also hear that story where they said they ran over a hornet's nest and 12
Yeah.
soldiers had to go to the hospital? Like, what are the odds that 12 out of 12 NOMR personnel carrier population all needed hospitalization from bee stings? It's crazy. But um, so the vehicles are clearly being hit. We've seen them clearly be disabled. And the
Yeah.
reason why we don't see the aftermath is very obvious. People act in challenging these things like that's some kind of a clue that nothing happened. Like if something happened, the fighter would stand there and show you that it happened, and
Hmm.
that's just poor discipline as a fighter. So
Hmm.
the fighters executing their task properly means
Hmm.
that you don't stand around um, and get you and your comrades killed.
Yeah. Exactly. So anyway, I don't think we can make a
Yeah, the tank doesn't blow up. It doesn't. That's not what happens.
right.
Um,
But it's not like a game of paintball. It's not a symbolic strike on the
Oh,
tank.
no, no, no.
Yeah.
We've seen the R&D of the
Yeah.
research and development of it with the rolled homogeneous armor. We've seen the results of it penetrating 650 millimeters
Yeah.
um rolled homogeneous steel. It's like it's not yeah, especially the Shawad, right? Like the Shawad that we
That's
saw be
another
used in
weapon. Yeah.
Rafah, and placed at the perfect distance behind the door. That's a wicked weapon.
Yeah.
No soldier would you you can't talk to any American soldier who would tell you that those don't do anything. Like that's just not serious.
Yeah. Okay, I don't want to waste any more time kind of trying to refute that. As a matter of logic, like they designed an arsenal to attack the armor that is coming at them.
Yeah. And the
they
proximity
would
is what
have,
makes them effective, is they get so close
yeah.
that the test numbers from the R&D are accurate because they're actually firing them from the closest basically proximity that you can to make the weapon work. So they're highly effective because of the positioning of them.
I was
Um,
trying to figure out how to summarize Gaza, and I was hoping that somebody was going to do it. And Abu Obeida basically said it's been 100 plus, as we just said,
yeah,
100
I
plus in
wanted
the
that
past
too.
10 days. Yeah, I was going through and I was making little tick marks and I was trying to I was trying to sort it out. And so I was very grateful that Abu Obeida said that today. He didn't say any specific numbers for soldiers. He said they're admitting to some, but we have counted much more. And he said by the dozen. He used an expression that was translated as by the dozen. That's the
Yeah.
translation I saw. So I don't know what
The
more.
Israelis said dozens. The Israelis admitted to dozens of airlifts,
Hmm.
medevac airlifts, which are the dramatic ones. Um, but yeah, Israel lies all the time. That same thing, they said that they had carried out thousands of medevacs, but
Mm,
they only admit to 1,700 injured soldiers. So how do you have? And then the footage of the medevac showed that the medevacs can have 6 or 8 guys in them, 4 or 6
right.
guys in them. So, so you've had thousands of those with 4 to 6 guys, like
Were you the one who showed the video of like training video the Israelis put of
yeah,
the
of the
training
Galilee.
for the Lebanon war, and the training is all just medevac training?
Yeah, it's all them just running. Yeah. And
Okay.
Israel's just doing this thing in the last 10 days where they're saying everybody's wounded. They weren't
Hmm.
doing that earlier in the war, but now they're just saying everybody's wounded. And you're
Nobody
watching
ever
on
dies.
videos.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody's ever dying. They're all just wounded, even though you're watching like um I mean, I don't know if recommend going to my Twitter feed where I've collected them, but there's one footage from Jabalia from
Yeah.
yesterday where they use a fragmentation warhead against 4 IDF soldiers who are out of their tank standing on the side of the road.
Yeah.
That those guys are not moderately injured. So
Yeah.
that weapon exploding is to expose troops is 4 dead. So to just have zero day after day after day, zero sniper shots that are clear kills, 0 dead that day.
Yeah. So Zaytun is over. Jabalia continues. I guess Jabalia is a little bit lower. Jabalia number of attacks per day may have peaked yesterday or 2 days ago, but we're still not trickling videos, we're flooding videos. And Rafa is as hot as it's ever been, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, just to give people a sense, like this is what
Yeah.
an attack log looks like. This is a 10-point font, single spaced, and this is 1 week. This is 1 week
One,
of
two,
just
three, four,
Qassam.
five. Yeah.
So it's you're seeing hundreds and hundreds of attacks from a
And like
force
you
that's supposed to be, starved and destroyed.
and as you like to say, these are not martyrdom operations. They're returning safely to their bases.
Yeah. And we're not
And
even seeing on the Israeli, like I followed the Israeli propaganda, like their channel too, their field reports and jihadi videos. And there's no indications of any numbers like that. And even when you do see them kill people, you're like, was was that Qassam fighter really riding a bicycle? Like
mm,
probably not, right?
hmm.
But even with those, they don't add up to what they say in their field reports. Their field reports are talking about killing 500, 700 fighters in a day in Jabalia and Zaytun. It's just not happening that way. Not even close. And all these fighters that are alive are all better fighters than they were before.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Israel's just really opened up a. Oh, so we're doing Abu Obeida because
Yeah,
he
we're ready
starts
for
with
Abu
that,
Obeida.
giving us that tally, which was handy.
Yeah. And oh, one other thing about Ismail Haniyeh, because he repeated the thing about Gilad Erdan of the UN ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, holding up Sinwar's picture. And he said, a few months ago, Netanyahu was holding up a picture of Palestine as a map of Israel. And now, thanks to this battle, the ambassador to the UN is holding up a picture of Yahya Sinwar, our dear brother Yahya Sinwar. So
That's a really good point.
he just kind of made that contrast. Like now that's a big difference in terms of how it's, as the kids say, how it started and how it's going, right? Um, so yeah, more on Abu Obeida. What else can we say about Abu Obeida's speech?
I mean, I wrote down just that this is a historic, that they've mounted a historic defense of Gaza, at Gaza as an entrenched, base of
Mhm.
operations, that is historically will be studied. He didn't say it quite that way, but that it was a historic and legendary defense. And he made the same points as Abu Hadi made about just the difference between life October 6th versus life October 7th. And
Hmm.
he talked about like the international community coalescing against Israel. And I don't recall hearing Abu Obeida talk like that before. Nasrallah
Hmm.
talks like that, but to sort of shout out I almost was reading it to see if he was going to shout out the student movement because he was talking about all these different countries and continents coming
Haniyeh
together in
did. Haniyeh
support.
did. But yeah, you're right. He mentioned all the continents of the world, Africa, Latin America. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that seemed something that for the fighters in the tunnels to identify that even world opinion is turned against Israel because of its, showing its face. But also, yeah, he also he made the point to call it the outskirts of Eastern Rafah. So he wasn't saying that they
Mm-hmm.
invaded Rafah.
Mm-hmm.
He said they're fighting on the outskirts of the eastern edge of Rafah, which
Mm-hmm.
is true, which is true. But I thought I wrote that down because it was a good point.
Well, the
And we
main, yeah, go
we're
ahead.
still able to hear from him at the most important times, right? Like
Yeah.
1 week ago or 10 days ago, we didn't think there was going to be a three-pronged invasion of the Gaza Strip where three divisions attacked three different spots. Um, and he responds to that happening, gives a speech in video, right? So he's able to
Okay.
give video messages. They're able to disseminate those messages. He's able to identify the day, and we're seeing that through all of these videos that the days are matching with the videos being released. That's what command and control looks like.
Yeah.
It might be manifesting as the ability to deliver a video, but it's the same channels, it's the same
Yeah.
systems. Those systems are functioning in the same way, and those systems have to function in order to meet an invasion like Jabalia right away. To meet them right away, guerrillas wouldn't do that. Guerrillas wouldn't meet them right away. Guerrillas would wait until they moved in and position themselves. This is an army that is deploying in defensive positions. I'm not belittling the guerrillas, and I'm just saying that the different fighting style
Yeah.
indicates that you still have an army functioning as an army.
On your Twitter, you drew the main point, which I thought was also the main point, which he said, we are ready for the sake of our people to stop the war at any time, and we would love to stop the war at any time, but we are prepared for a long war of attrition. And I think that's
I think that was the most important part.
that's the most important part.
Because if that's true, it's even more remarkable, right? Not very many military analysts that believed that Qassam could fight indefinitely for a year. And that's what the Israelis are talking about. And to be honest, they said that on New Year's Day. They said 2024 was going to be the year of war. And
Hmm.
then just the other day, the government reported to the hotels that have the people evacuated from the north that they're going to be evacuated through November or through December, through the end of the
2024.
2024. So
Well,
they do look like this is what a year of war looks like. And they're not saying it's the Rafah invasion. Even the
yeah.
Americans aren't saying this is the Rafah invasion. They're calling it like a precise operation.
Oh, yeah.
And the State Department and the Pentagon keep talking about it like there's some different invasion that's Rafah.
But there's two psychological points I want to make about that. One is since October, they were invading Gaza and they were threatening the invasion of Rafah. So they told everybody to go to Rafah and then they threatened Rafah. And threatening Rafah became a psychological weapon in itself. And once you actually go through with it, which they have, you lose the ability to threaten it. And so there's nothing left to threaten. There's no threats left. There's no more army to mobilize. There's no more firepower to deploy, and there's no more places to invade. So the ability to threaten something is often more powerful than the ability to do it. And that is yet another tool that the Israelis have just given up when they invaded Rafah. And the other psychological point I wanted to make is there are a lot of things that are unthinkable for Israel, like lots of people leaving, like the economy becoming unviable, and attrition kind of setting in, maybe the US not being able to send the same munitions because they're engaged in other conflicts and they have to supply the war with Ukraine, and I mean, yeah, the war on Ukraine or with Ukraine and Russia, and um, maybe they're going to get into something in with China, who knows? So all of those things that are unthinkable start to become thinkable and maybe even possible and like in the realm of possibility the longer the war goes on. So in that psychological sense too, a long war also favors the resistance. So you know, there's like this urgent need, like Abu Obeida said, for humanitarian reasons to stop the war. But like, the way Nasrallah talked about it too is like this war is an opportunity to actually maybe liberate the whole region.
And
So,
people don't trust Israel to follow through on the agreement. So even if
right.
Hamas was to capitulate
Yeah.
to save their people, the
Who
people
says
in
it
Gaza
saves?
don't believe that Israel would deliver on that. So they would be selling out their own people
Yeah.
for something that wouldn't actually happen.
Yeah. And
That's
how
why that's
many?
one of the reasons why you still have so much support for the resistance on the ground, despite the horrors that people are living through. People aren't demanding a ceasefire. People have had demos for ceasefires,
Yeah.
and they were very, very, very happy when the ceasefire was
Announced.
fakely announced,
Yeah.
like heartbreakingly so. But they're not like there's a unity on the ground that
Yeah.
comes from the sacrifice that's being made has to be it has to be delivered on.
Right. And it may not be able to be delivered on in the short term, which means it's going to go on. So, I mean, that was the main. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to take
Mhm.
from Abu Ubaida's speech, but for me, the two things were the quantitative one of 100 attacks in 10
Yeah.
days and this point that they are prepared for a long war of attrition. And then,
Yeah.
um,
And he pointed out that Qassam struck back harder than at any point during the war when they
mhm,
invaded Jabalia.
mhm,
So he's saying he's not a guy he doesn't exaggerate. He's not throwing around that this is the things are the big list thing that ever happened. He's a pretty careful speaker, and he
mhm,
said we struck back harder than at any time during the war,
yeah,
which indicates that they're able to that if they were took serious losses, which they did. It's
mhm.
very dangerous
It's
fighting
war.
these kind of
Yeah,
wars, but they've obviously been able to rebuild themselves.
yeah,
And he said, greetings to Yemen, of course, greetings to Hezbollah and people of Lebanon, obviously. Shout out to Iraq and a shout out to the unprecedented global solidarity. And he said that all of these things together, the battlefield and the solidarity elements, are a strategic impact for Israel
hmm,
and emboldens their enemies, which is totally true. And also something that Nasrallah said from the other side. Basically, Nasrallah said, if you can't win a decisive battle against people who you've blockaded for 20 years and don't have access to the outside world. How are you going to handle Hezbollah if they decide to come? You can't even knock down Iran's missiles when they're fired. You need to have the U.S. warships deployed off your shore, waiting
hmm,
for that to happen for months. All the strategic airlifts, all the weapons that the U.S. has given them, and yeah, yeah, he pointed out the confusion and failure in the security and political establishment, and those are just seem like obvious comments, but for the guerrilla commander, spokesperson commander, soldier commander to point out that what the reason why these negotiations fall apart in a lot of ways is because there's absolutely no cohesion in the Israeli political establishment. And we know that what the military establishment, you and I have talked about that on this show for a number of months, that is just completely rotten. You can see the whole chain of command is messed up. And that's how these like TikTok
Yeah.
things happen. Like that TikTok, the attack on the staging ground outside of Rafah, those guys showed up like on the Wednesday and started doing TikTok live videos.
Well, you probably, I don't know, I think you showed, or if you didn't show it, you must have seen another one of those so either suicide drone or missile videos on a Israeli base, and the guy who gets hit is like on his phone right up until the end.
Yeah.
He absolutely didn't see it. He's like standing around in shorts on his phone in the open.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's uh it's just a belief in complete safety, like at all times, that they can't
But that they
shake.
have this huge proportion of their population that's not going to go back. Like CBS 60 Minutes went and did a report on the North, and they were talking to people in those kibbutz in the North, and they said 30% of people aren't
Hmm.
going to come back no
That's what
matter what
Nasrallah
happens.
must have seen that, because that's what he cited that, yeah.
Yeah. So that's like the person from 60 Minutes, that she wasn't going to break. I think she was accidentally there basically when that moment happened. And yeah, people are just like, no, we're not coming back.
Amal Saad was talking about this. I don't know if you saw her thread from yesterday, but she said if the 2006 war shattered the myth of Israel's invincibility, this war has shattered the myth of its capability. The beating it has taken from both resistance groups these past few days alone demonstrates that it's not merely facing a Sisyphean task, as its chief of staff Halevi put it, but flogging an already dead horse. Rather than breaking Hamas's resolve, Israel's overkill strategy has unwittingly fostered a more robust and determined adversary and allowed it to rally support in Palestine and beyond. And I
It's a
think
pretty
that's
good
right.
point.
Yeah. Like overkill, that's the thing about Israel, right? Like they unload everything at the first problem, which means there's no escalation potential, and now there really is nothing to threaten. They're doing everything that they possibly can. And it's the resistance that's slowly dialing things up. And it's Israel that has to wait and see what's going to come, what horrible thing is coming next.
Yeah, and I think that's what this limited raid thing is about, is that I think that Israel um, will use these types of raids to buy time for a while, to drag
Yeah.
this. That's how you drag it out.
Well,
Um,
I was surprised. There are a lot of things about the way Israel's behaved that I've had a really hard time making sense of. I was surprised that they did a ground invasion. I was surprised by how many times they withdrew and then came back. I'm surprised by how many casualties they've taken and continued the war. Um, I knew about the Hannibal Doctrine, but I'm surprised by their willingness to sacrifice their prisoners or their
well,
hostages,
apparently
whatever.
they did it with their soldiers the other day too. There's a Qassam report from
A
the other day that they
huge
did the
friendly
same thing.
fire.
They couldn't rescue their crew,
Yeah,
so they killed them, and they
yeah.
didn't want to have trophies left behind, so they killed their own soldiers so that
Mhm.
so that Qassam didn't drive around in an armored bulldozer. It's really sick. It's definitely not the army you want to fight for.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you want your basic premise to be no man left
No
behind
man left
because you
behind.
might be one of those men.
Step one of army life. Look to your left, look to your right. These are the
Yeah,
guys that are with you. You're,
yeah.
They keep you safe. You keep them safe. Well, all right. Um, I guess we'll see what the weekend brings.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing another basically double resistance show on Wednesday because there's so many videos.
Yeah, you're gonna have to.
If you like video breakdowns,
You
Wednesday's your
know where to
day.
go. Uh,
Electronic Intifada live stream, noon Eastern, Wednesdays,
yeah.
or anytime thereafter, which is the beauty of these live streams, is that
Yeah, you could just watch them recorded at 2 times speed, no less.
don't watch my segments at two times.
All right, guys. What do I say? Like and comment and subscribe and hang in there. We'll see you with the next one. But these are remarkable days, and
Yeah.
every day there's a surprise. Um,
This is a historic battle. We're watching a historic battle right now. Don't let
don't let defeatism seep. This is now is not the time for defeatism.
no, and it's not accurate. It's not an accurate assessment. It might be a human one, but it's not accurate.
Oh, I did have one last point about why I didn't report on the ICJ.
Oh,
Um, the ICJ, when South Africa went to the ICJ and argued for provisional measures, I thought that was really important, and we talked about it a lot, and the finding was important. Everything, their arguments were important, but the going and asking for additional provisional measures at this point, it's so clear that Israel's not going to listen. And so, whatever phase of Israel facing consequences for not following the law, whatever international court order has not yet happened. When that does happen, I will definitely report on it. But like we're in the same phase as we were at the beginning of making arguments and showing evidence, and then Israel ignoring it. So again, it's the reason we report on the battlefield events is because that's where this is going to be decided.
yeah.
All right, we'll stop there.